Once again, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Munich Security Conference's YouTube channel. I'm Hadley Gamble, the senior anchor and international correspondent for CNBC, and I'm joined now by the NATO Secretary General. It's wonderful to have you on the program. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Hadley.
I want to kick off by asking you to take a step back to the last conversation that we had. It was back in December, and I asked you if, given the economic situation that Russia now faces, if they are really a significant threat. And your answer at that time was that they're an economic power that's in decline, but they do still pose a threat. Where are we today, in your view?
Also, what we have seen over the last months is the biggest military buildup since the end of the Cold War, with the largest concentration of forces, and they have all the capabilities in place, Russia, to launch an attack on Ukraine with hardly any warning at all.
They can afford to do all of this.
Yeah, they have the places there, so no one is actually denying that Russia has all these forces in place. The question is, will they launch an attack? Of course, there's no certainty about that, but
the President of the United States seems certain, but you're not.
Well, we have more. No. We, as NATO allies, the United States, all of the NATO allies, we have the same assessment that it's a very high risk for a Russian attack on Ukraine. And that is partly because of the military build-up, the presence of Russian forces, but also the very threatening rhetoric, and also that we have seen attempts by Russia to stage a pretext to create the situation in Donbass or somewhere else as the excuse for attacking Ukraine. We have seen that have false accusations about genocide. We have seen very high increase in number of violations of the ceasefire in Donbass, and all of this, of course, adds to the picture that this is a real danger for a Russian attack.
You and I spoke about this the last time back in December, and then prior to that, I was in Moscow speaking to President Putin. That was back in October, and there was already a troop buildup, which had been happening all through the summer. Did we sleepwalk into this crisis?
Well, we warned the NATO allies, and NATO, we were very transparent and clear and vocal about this, so actually starting this summer, telling them about this gradual, telling the world about the gradual military build-up, and also sharing with the world, the public, that what the indications and the intelligence we had then indicated that it would continue to roughly the level of forces they have today. So what has happened now was actually predicted by our intelligence many
months like the situation with the pullout in Afghanistan. You predicted the problems.
Yeah, but that's a very different thing, because that was us leaving in a very difficult situation. This is actually predicting what Russia is planning to do. Again, we don't have certainty, but we see the facts. We see the build-up, we see the rhetoric, we see, we know the track record of Russia. They have used force against Ukraine before. So there is a real and increasing danger for an attack on Ukraine. At the same time, it's never too late for Russia to step back, to stop preparing for war, and to start engaging in talks, diplomatic talks with NATO and NATO allies to find a political solution.
If there were to be an invasion, what are the first things that you believe the West should be worried about beyond the actual incursion itself? Are we talking about cyber attacks? What are we talking about? Because no doubt President Putin is going to react to whatever Western sanctions are put in place.
Well, it depends a bit on what you mean. So my most serious concern is casualties, is people being killed in Ukraine. This is a loss of life, which is the most brutal and immediate consequence of a war of this scale that we can see be launched against Ukraine. Then what we will do from the NATO side is that we will make sure that Russia will see that there are high costs that comes with such aggressive aggression against a sovereign nation. These are economic sanctions, diplomatic sanctions. The European Union, NATO allies have been working very closely together over the last months, weeks to prepare that. And then, of course, we will also make sure that there is no room for misunderstanding about our readiness and capability to defend and protect all NATO allies. Ukraine is a value-added partner. We support them. For NATO allies like Poland, Romania, other countries in the whole of the alliance, we have an absolute and ironclad security guarantee that an attack on one ally will trigger a response from the whole alliance.
But do you believe that there would be a threat to NATO allies?
Well, I believe that Russia understands that NATO is the strongest military alliance in history, that we stand united, and this is not only a commitment in words in our founding treaty, in Article 5 of the founding treaty, but also a commitment which is demonstrated every day by the increased presence of NATO troops in the eastern part of the alliance. We have already increased our presence in the air, on land, at sea, but we are also ready to reinforce that presence very quickly if needed.
The question, of course, is particularly for the international community, is that if there are economic sanctions, no doubt President Putin will have some kind of response to that. And what we've seen in the past are cyber attacks. What would your take on that be? Because you're very familiar with trying to understand the mind meld of the Kremlin, because you've had to do it.
Yeah, but of course, there's always a danger for cyber attacks, and we have seen cyber attacks also before.
Like hitting the banking system.
That has happened. There have been many allies reporting about cyber attacks, most likely conducted by Russia. We have seen it against economic institutions, against parliaments, and we have seen efforts to try to meddle in domestic political processes.
So NATO allies should be ready.
Absolutely, but we are ready, and we have done a lot to strengthen our cyber defenses, to share information about malign activities, cyber activities, and also to share best practices when it comes to protect and defend our network. So cyber is a new dimension of our security environment, which has been high on the NATO agenda for a long time.
One of the questions I posed a little bit earlier today in the program to the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, was one about Germany itself and its readiness as a NATO ally. And there's a perception that Germany is the weakest link of NATO. What's your take? Because it's political for them, internally, and of course with the energy situation and Nord Stream 2.
Germany is a highly valued NATO ally, and they contribute to NATO's collective defense in many different ways. They have actually over the last years increased defense spending significantly. They are investing in new modern capabilities, and they have Germany is leading one of the battle groups in the Baltic countries in Lithuania. They have recently decided, and actually in the process of sending in more German troops to Lithuania to in a way further strengthen our presence there. They are playing a key role in some of our naval operations. They are leading our presence in the Aegean Sea to help enforce the agreement between Turkey and the EU on migration. Germany is in Kosovo, help to stabilize the Western Balkans. So Germany is really doing a lot in this alliance, and Germany, as Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor, has also made it clear that, of course, if there is an attack, they're also ready to impose sanctions.
Yeah. So you don't think the criticism of Germany is fair?
No, I think what we see now is a very united NATO, that we stand together. And if Russia wants to divide us, they actually get the opposite. They get a more united NATO. And if Russia wants less NATO at its borders, they get the opposite. They get more NATO. So Germany is a part of this. The biggest reinforcement of NATO's collective defense since the Cold War has taken place over the last years and the last months, supported by Germany.
Before I let you go, how do we, as the West and as NATO allies, prevent a crisis like this in future, in the sense that there's been a conversation surrounding Nord Stream 2 and whether or not giving President Putin that ability to hold the West hostage via energy?
Well, I think all NATO allies realizes that we need to be less dependent on energy from one source, from gas from Russia. And therefore, as for instance, the President of the European Commission stated today, the European Commission is working hard with all the member states to reduce dependence on Russian gas, partly to reduce emissions of greenhouse gas, of CO2, but also to be less vulnerable for any aggressive actions from Russia using gas as a political tool.
She called out Gazprom specifically.
Well, she said that what we have said, what we have seen is that Russia has used gas in this situation to put pressure on European countries, and European Union, Europe should be less dependent on Russian gas.
Do you believe that we're going to see sanctions on Gazprom?
Well, I will not go into the specific sanctions which are discussed among NATO allies and the European Union, but we have made clear, or allies have made clear, the European Union has made clear that there will be severe sanctions, unprecedented sanctions, if Russia once again uses force against Ukraine.
Were you surprised that President Zelensky made it to Munich?
Well, that's
given the time frames that we keep hearing from the United States.
First of all, this is a judgment and a decision he has to make in Munich. He will have the opportunity to meet with a lot of decision makers, also important for his country. He's going to meet with the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and many other decision makers. So I think that has value for him. And then, of course, it's his call, his decision, whether to go or not.
Mr. Secretary General, we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, and we really appreciate what you do. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.